Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. And I just want to say I appreciate Carol and Judy leading the group last week. I understand things went very well, and I'm glad to be back. We've been talking about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which can get kind of preachy in a way. We're up to right livelihood, sama ajivo. And I will talk about that, but I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about that. But let's just start with the definition of right livelihood in the Pali Canon. So what is right livelihood? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones, having abandoned dishonest livelihood, keeps his life going with right livelihood. This is called right livelihood. Having abandoned dishonest livelihood. Dishonest, I guess, is the key word there. So, well, I guess most obviously dishonest would be, telling lies. If you were, for instance, selling a service or a product to represent it dishonestly, to say something about it that is false. I think it could necessarily include leaving out information that's relevant that you might leave out in order to persuade the customer or client to engage in the service or purchase the product that, had he or she known, might not have. So deception, just being deceptive, deceiving the customer or client, leaving out relevant information. Forgive me if any of you have heard me tell this story before, but this is about when I was in first grade. We lived in Montgomery, Alabama at the time, and I went to Bellingrath Elementary School. We were only there for 1 year, but that was my first year in school. And well along during the year, I actually remember a few things from that year. I can't remember what the teacher looked like or what her name was. I know that it was an all-white class because at that time schools were segregated in Alabama. But in any case, one episode I do remember, the boy sitting next to me had a nickel and I had a dime. And he suggested that we trade. And I took him up on it. Well, clearly, he thought that the nickel was worth more than the dime. Of course, nickels at that time were made out of a nickel copper alloy. And dimes at that time were made out of silver, a more precious metal. So the dime was smaller in size, but larger in value. And I was aware of this, but the boy sitting next to me apparently wasn't. So I'm not sure how the teacher found out about this transaction, but she did. And she kept me after school to write something on the blackboard. I'm not sure what it was. It was something along the lines of, "I will not cheat others." And I had to write this on the blackboard for about 40 minutes before going home. And so I remembered that. The episode came up at the dinner table, I remember, that night. And my father took my side in the story. he was fond of the phrase caveat emptor, or let the buyer beware. So he thought I was showing business prowess at a young age. So I got mixed messages from adults about that. But clearly the Buddha would have considered that wrong livelihood to deceive others in making transactions, to withhold relevant information. There is also another sutta where the Buddha speaks specifically about livelihood for lay persons like ourselves. A lay follower should not engage in 5 types of business. Which 5? Business in weapons, business in human beings, business in what is it? Business in meat, it should be, I'm sorry. I didn't proofread this enough. Business in intoxicants and business in poison. So not dealing in weapons, slaves, meat, intoxicants, poisons. Well, the Buddha was talking to people at that time when life in some ways was simpler. And now things are more complicated. Commerce is complicated. And we might end up dealing in those items even without being fully aware of it. Or unavoidably, I mean, in rural communities, the only, entry-level job might be working at the convenience store where you're selling beef jerky and bourbon, among other things. And any of us who are fortunate enough to have an IRA are probably investing in a number of things of which we are unaware, perhaps weapons or intoxicants or poisons, hopefully not slaves, but possibly, given the operations of large transnational corporations, we don't really know everything that's going on out there. So we're probably involved in a number of things that the Buddha would disapprove of. So I think these sort of rule-based moralities are useful, but limited. And they're most useful when things are fairly simple and straightforward. And they get less useful when things get complicated, when there are competing claims or two things pulling in the opposite direction. I had an experience this week. Returning to town, my former violin teacher has taken a position in Hong Kong, and there was a new teacher at the shop where I went for lessons. And she was pleasant enough, and I considered the option of continuing lessons with her. But as she played, I really didn't like her vibrato. It was kind of mechanical and not pleasing to listen to, and also her intonation was not nearly so good as my former teacher. So I really had doubts about whether I would benefit that much from continuing with lessons. So the next day I called and just canceled my subsequent lessons. And they're very earnest at this shop, and they asked, the person I spoke with on the phone asked, well, why are you canceling your lessons? And I said, well, I've just decided to take a break. Decided to take a break from lessons for a while. Well, this was not entirely accurate. It didn't really speak to the real reasons that I was canceling lessons. I had in mind, though, that if I were to complain about her playing or complain about or to say that I didn't feel like I trusted that she would be a good teacher for me, I thought that might have an adverse impact on her future there as a violin teacher at the shop. And in truth, most of the people she teaches are 7 or 8 years of age and could probably benefit from her teaching. So for what I thought were good reasons, I didn't want to be fully open about why I was not wanting to take lessons. So it was a certain deception. The sort of thing that doesn't make you feel good, but also, in retrospect, you might do over again because you can't really think of a better way of handling the situation. So I think there are hazards in the precepts, hazards in this rule-based approach to morality that ought to be addressed. And one is that things do get complicated, and another is that I think there is the risk of self-deception, the risk of fooling yourself, and because we're putting so much weight on right speech and right action and even right thought, that you might start trying to convince yourself that you're doing this even when you aren't, and might try to suppress the occasions when you fail. And in truth, I don't think anyone can claim to be 100% in right speech, in right action, and right thought. It's just not, I don't think, humanly possible. And I don't really know what 100% would look like. So I think that's one hazard with this rule-based approach to morality. Another hazard is the hazard of self-righteousness, of applying these rules to others as well as to yourself. They're actually intended, I think, to apply to oneself. But if you start applying right speech, right action, right livelihood to others, there is the risk of starting to feel superior to others, which is always an extremely hazardous thing to do. So there's that looming self-righteousness that can accompany just unadulterated allegiance to the precepts. I think it's much preferable just to accept at the get-go that you're going to fail, that there are going to be times when there's just not right speech and right action and even right livelihood. There's just, it's just not going to go that way. And to appeal to another avenue of morality besides rule-based morality, and that is virtue-based reality. To arouse compassion for oneself and others because of our human predicament of being limited, of failing from time to time, trying to be honest about it, repair what damage we can, move on. And I think this kind of compassion can be applied to oneself, but also to others, recognizing that others are in the same predicament, making an effort, dealing with delusion, dealing with anger, dealing with loss, dealing with all the things that humans have to live with. Dealing with greed. And cultivating that compassion for oneself and others, I think, is an essential part of working with the precepts. So, I think I'll stop there, and I would be interested in thoughts on your part about these notions of, well, right livelihoods, what we're talking about today, but we can include right speech and right action. How they're useful, how they're potentially dangerous at times. And what limitations we have as human beings. Limitations that we know about, and perhaps even greater limitations that we don't know about. So we'll break into groups, and I'll and we'll rejoin in a few moments. Again, it is so good to see everybody today, and look forward to seeing you shortly.